There are not a ton of moments in life when something, some news, inspires so much unadulterated glee that you find yourself breaking into spontaneous applause, that you find yourself physically clapping with happiness. I mean, babies do it all the time because babies are joyful little dumplings, and so they clap, yay! But it's a little harder to elicit fits of clapping in a full-grown adult. It has to be really, really good news. It's got to be something like winning $1 million on a TV game show, for example. You might jump up and down and start clapping, but it's kind of a high bar, right? Well, for one contingent of the Republican Party in Congress, the contingent that happens to be running the Republican Party in Congress right now, the events of the last 24 to 48 hours have been something akin to winning the showcase showdown or picking the right vowel or whatever. From the Washington Post yesterday, on cusp of showdown, House conservatives excited. It's wonderful, said Republican Congressman John Culberson, clapping his hands to emphasize the point. We're 100% united, he said. Congressman Culberson was also the person who described as giddy the atmosphere at a House Republican meeting over the weekend where they voted to shut down the government. Representative John Culberson of Texas said that as he and his colleagues were clamoring for a vote, he shouted out his own encouragement. I said, like 9/11, let's roll. As Congress hurtled through last night's midnight deadline and we shut down, in those final moments when it became clear that we would shut down, Republican Congressman Dave Schweikert was so psyched about what was going on that he found himself at a loss for words. Talking to a reporter from the National Journal, Congressman Schweikert was eager and excited, his eyes wide and his smile broadening. He had a discernible spring in his step. News that to the rest of the country had been cause for disappointment and anxiety and anger, for some Republican members of Congress has just been awesome. They've been really happy. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann told the Washington Post, quote, "We are very excited. It is exactly what we wanted." The Republican Party, of course, took control of the House in the 2010 midterm elections. They got the House. John Boehner became the Speaker. But before that election, before they even got control of the House of Representatives, 6 months before that election, Republicans running for Congress and conservative media and prominent voices on the right were already promising, already hoping even, that if the Republicans could win themselves the majority in the House, they would go for a government shutdown, even before they got elected.
There's gonna be a government shutdown, just like in 95 and 96. But we're gonna win it this time, and I'll be fighting on your side.
So starve them of the fun, starve the beast, so to speak.
Absolutely, and have the courage to shut down the government if we have to.
We say, look, we're in partnership with the American people. We're listening to the American people. This is what we're going to do. If the government shuts down, we want you with us.
There are a lot worse things than shutting down the government. You know what one thing is? One thing worse than shutting down the government is the government continuing on like it is now.
We lined those things up chronologically. Those were all before the 2010 election. That was August, September, October, all 2010, all before the election. Giddy was the word used repeatedly to describe how Republicans felt before the 2010 election, about how winning that election would mean that they could shut down the government. Quote, "I'm almost giddy thinking about a government shutdown next year." Utah Senator Mike Lee, then a candidate for the Senate, he was also clap your hands, jump for joy, giddy at the prospect of being voted into government in order to be allowed to shut it down. He was giddy about winning and then using power in the Senate to do just that. It was not a secret that the wave of Republicans who swept into office in those midterm elections in 2010 were psyched about sticking a wrench in the government, about making the government stop working. They ran for office, promising their base that that is what they would do with power if they got it. And starting right after the election, just days after the 2010 election, they got to work on what they said they would work on.
Are you willing to participate in what would lead to a shutdown of the federal government to stop this monstrosity from going down the tracks?
I agree with Congressman Boehner. We need to do whatever's necessary to make sure this bill never goes into effect.
Congressman Nunley, would you be willing, I think you just answered it with health care, but when it comes to fiscal policy, are you willing to participate in a shutdown of the federal government if that's the only way to get the president to come to the table?
Yeah.
We will do what we have to do to shut down the government if we have to, So you think even if that were to happen, theoretically, it wouldn't be as bad as people make it out?
No, I don't think it would be. I really don't.
Do you think shutdown should be off the table?
Everything ought to be on the table.
I got to tell you, most people in my district say shut it down. This country very well may need some sort of shock therapy.
Would it be a good thing fiscally and philosophically if the government did shut down for a few weeks and the American people could see life would go on without the federal government for a little while?
I don't think it would hurt one bit.
Even if it means, say, showing how serious we are. Okay, government's going to have to shut down.
If liberals in the Senate would rather play political games and shut down the government instead of making a small down payment on fiscal discipline and reform, I say shut it down.
It has been roughly 2.5 years since Republicans got control of the House in that election. And in those 2.5 years, they threatened to shut down the government or default on the national debt 7 times. They were unsuccessful 6 of those times, but the 7th time is the charm, apparently. This week has not given them any sort of legislative victory. It has not helped them achieve some sort of policy change that they believe addresses the nation's problems. They just ran out the clock and got the government to stop working, which is what they have said they wanted all along. There's been a variety of reasons why they said they wanted it. The only thing that's been consistent is that they said they wanted a shutdown. President Obama today said that he wants a successful Republican Party. He says we need a Republican Party that's interested in governing. We need both parties to function if we want to make sure the underlying stability of the country is maintained. Yes, if we want a stable and functioning government, that is exactly what we need. But that is a big if. And it can't be denied that a lot of Republicans in Congress now ran for Congress by promising their constituencies that if they got to Congress, they would use their power in Congress to shut down the government. And you can tell from the smiles on their faces, mission accomplished as far as they're concerned. Now that we are shut down, why do we think they're suddenly going to get embarrassed about this? Joining us now is Karen Tumulty. She's a national political reporter for the Washington Post. Karen, thanks very much for being with us. Nice to see you.
Hi, Rachel.
So, for Republicans in the House, what is the political resonance? What is the political appeal of a shutdown? Going back to even while they were campaigning to get into Congress in the first place.
Well, I think one thing you need to know is that if you look at the House of Representatives now, the Republicans, fewer than 1/5 of those Republicans were in the House in 1995 and in early 1996 when it shut down. And let me tell you, Rachel, you talk to those guys who were here before, and they are not clapping their hands because they've seen this movie and they know how it ends. But I think that, you know, these men and women ran in a different environment, and they also ran in sort of a mythology about what happened the last time around, and they somehow think it comes out differently.
I wanted to ask you about that last point specifically because I have been hung up on this idea that every time I start researching in the conservative media and I look at transcripts of conservative talk radio hosts or I go back and look at old conservative speeches on the subject of the lessons of the 1995-1996 shutdown, I feel like I'm seeing a pretty consistent revisionist history that shutdown wasn't so bad, didn't really hurt the Republicans, certainly didn't explain Newt Gingrich losing the speakership, didn't hurt the party at all. Bob Dole was just a bad candidate and Clinton was going to win anyway. I feel like there is a real consistent revisionist history. Does that explain
Absolutely.
what they're telling each other?
Well, what people forget is that the Republicans were really riding high, and Bill Clinton was pretty much flat on his back going into that shutdown. In fact, I went out today and looked at our polling numbers, and going into that shutdown in 1995, Bob Dole was only behind Bill Clinton in the Washington Post poll by 6 points. Coming out of that shutdown, he was behind by 16 points.
Wow.
And while it is true that in the next election, that certainly set Bill Clinton on his road to a landslide in the next election, really resurrected his presidency. But also, the Republicans will say, look, you know, we held on to our House majority. We only lost 2 seats, and we picked up 2 seats in the Senate. And what that overlooks is what happened in 1996. You get to the middle of 1996, and the polling is suggesting they're actually going to lose the House. So what the Republicans did was they began to do a lot of deals with Bill Clinton, including welfare reform, a crime bill. Essentially, it was a Sophie's choice because they had to sort of cut Bob Dole loose. They, took his best issues away from him. But that's what happened.
Karen, in terms of the way that governing is going now in this last couple of years, you coined the phrase this week that this is governing by near-death experience, this kind of crisis to crisis to crisis. If that is how we are governing now, how does that affect what we can and can't do as a country? Not just in the partisan balance, but what we're capable of.
Well, I think the sort of scariest thing, the most corrosive thing about this is that after each of these near-death experiences, they don't resolve anything. And in fact, the two sides become sort of more fixed in their positions. In fact, this is the first time we have come right up to the 11th hour, and the two sides are not even talking to each other. The Republicans have made a demand that Barack Obama is never going to meet, and Barack Obama has decided that, his previous negotiations with the Republicans suggest there's nothing in it for him to engage as well. So we're not settling anything with any of these crises. All we're doing is sort of pushing the two sides further apart.
Karen Tumulty, national political reporter for the Washington Post, and somebody who I think has been writing with particularly incisive wit about these issues recently. Karen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Ray.